Not every event in the life of King Solomon was revealed in the Bible. Did you know that behind his unmatched wisdom and golden reign were shadows of betrayal, hidden rebellions, and spiritual downfall? Did you know the same king who built the majestic temple of the Lord also secretly built altars for pagan gods, right in the heart of Jerusalem? How did a man so deeply loved by God become entangled with 1,000 foreign women? What really happened behind the palace walls? And how did his decisions shape the future of Israel forever? If you think you know the story of Solomon, think again. This is more than just a biblical biography. It's a suspenseful journey through divine favor, dangerous ambition, and the weight of legacy. So grab your popcorn. Sit tight, because what you're about to hear is the full story of King Solomon, raw, breathtaking, and deeply revealing. And if you're passionate about Bible mysteries and ancient truths like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a single episode. Every great story begins with a turning point. For Solomon, that turning point happened before he ever took a breath. Jerusalem was still shaking from the sin of its king. David, mighty in battle, tender in worship, and chosen by God, had stumbled into a dark chapter with Bathsheba. The cost of that fall was great: blood on the battlefield, a prophet's rebuke, and the death of an innocent child born from a forbidden union. But that storm had passed. The tears had been wept. The kingdom had absorbed the scandal. Now, a strange quiet fell upon the palace, a divine calm. And from that stillness, a child was born. He did not arrive with trumpet blasts or royal proclamations. No priests lined the streets. No commanders saluted the nursery. But heaven was watching. Angels marked his breath. The Lord, who sees the heart, had his gaze fixed on this newborn. Bathsheba, no longer just a figure of controversy, now carried a mother's grace. Her arms cradled a second son, not born of shame, but of promise. And when David looked into the boy's face, something shifted in his spirit. The pain of yesterday dimmed. In that child's cry, he didn't just hear life, he heard legacy. They named him Solomon, from shalom, meaning peace. It was no ordinary name. It was a prophetic declaration. A name that stood in stark contrast to David's bloody life as a man of war. Solomon would be different. His hands would not be stained by enemy blood. His throne would be built on wisdom, not warfare. He would usher in an era where swords were laid down and gold flowed through Jerusalem like water. But the story didn't end with that name. While the people celebrated Solomon's birth quietly behind palace walls, God was preparing a more profound declaration, one that bypassed kings, servants, and even family. He sent his message through Nathan the prophet, the very same prophet who once confronted David with thunderous judgment. This time, Nathan didn't come with correction, he came with affection. The Lord had spoken, "Give him another name." Jedediah, meaning beloved of the Lord. It was more than a name. It was a divine stamp. A heavenly seal placed on a child born from brokenness but redeemed by grace. It told the world that though Solomon was the son of David, his identity would not be rooted in scandal, but in God's love. That word, beloved, echoed through the palace like a prophetic song. Unlike any of David's other sons, this child had God's personal favor announced at birth. He was not only the fruit of a royal household. He was the bearer of divine destiny. As Solomon grew, whispers began in the palace corridors. This child was different. He listened more than he spoke. He walked with quiet confidence. He stared into the scrolls of Moses with hunger far beyond his years. The priests noticed. The servants watched. Even the prophet Nathan lingered longer during visits. David too saw it. This boy had depth. While his older brothers fought for position, Solomon asked questions. While others chased weapons, he chased words. And slowly, David's heart began to shift. He began to wonder, could this be the son the Lord spoke about? The one who would build the temple? The one whose throne would be established forever? And so, Solomon's childhood unfolded under divine favor. Jerusalem was unaware that its future king was already walking among them, not in robes of royalty, but in simplicity. He was learning, growing, listening. But not all hearts rejoiced. In secret corners of the kingdom, ambition brewed. Among David's older sons, a dangerous realization was beginning to take root. Solomon, the quiet one, the peaceful one, the favored one, was being watched by the king. And envy, like poison, began to spread. But Solomon didn't know. He wasn't preparing for war. He was being shaped in silence. Raised by a mother who had tasted disgrace and redemption. Advised by a prophet who had seen judgment and mercy. Protected by a father whose heart beat in psalms. He wasn't crowned yet, but heaven had already chosen him. Born from ashes, wrapped in favor, and named Beloved of the Lord, Solomon's destiny had just begun. The final days of David's reign were anything but peaceful. Though his sword rested, his house did not. The once feared warrior king had grown feeble, wrapped in robes, but shivering with age. His breath was shallow. His strength, legendary in the songs of Israel, had become a whisper. Yet one thing remained unwritten: who would wear the crown next? David had many sons. And royal blood does not flow quietly. In the absence of a public declaration, ambition stirred like wildfire. Enter Adonijah, David's fourth son, tall, handsome, and already adored by many in the court. He was no fool. He knew what happened when a throne seemed ownerless. He had seen how Absalom rose and fell. This time, Adonijah would strike before anyone else could even lift a hand. He gathered chariots. Recruited 50 men to run ahead of him like kings of old. He secured powerful allies, Joab, the commander of Israel's army, and Abiathar, the priest. Men who once stood shoulder to shoulder with David now whispered behind his back. Without his father's blessing, Adonijah declared himself king. It was bold, public, dangerous. And it almost worked. Trumpets sounded. Feasts began. At the stone of Zoheleth, near En Rogel, Adonijah threw a lavish party, not just for family, but for all who dared to dream of a new regime. He sacrificed animals like a king, toasted like a king, and called himself king. The wind carried the news across Jerusalem: Adonijah reigns. But not everyone bowed. Nathan the prophet, sharp-eyed and spirit-led, sensed the rising treason. He knew God's plan. Solomon was the chosen one. And so he moved swiftly, not with a sword, but with strategy. He went straight to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. Urgency tightened his voice. Have you not heard? Adonijah has made himself king, and our Lord David knows nothing about it. Bathsheba's heart raced. She wasn't just a mother now. She was the mother of promise. And if she remained silent, her son's head would roll before his crown was even forged. Together, they stepped into David's chamber, that sacred place where the king, though frail, still held the authority of heaven. Bathsheba knelt and reminded David of his oath. My lord, did you not swear that Solomon would sit on your throne after you? The urgency in her voice pierced the thick air of the room. Nathan followed her words with prophetic fire. My king, this act by Adonijah was not done in your name. If Solomon is not crowned now, chaos will claim the throne. And then David, weary, breathless, but still king, rose in spirit. Like a lion awakening in his final hour, David summoned his loyal men, Zadok the priest, Benaiah the warrior, Nathan the prophet. His command was clear, urgent, and divinely precise. Take Solomon. Place him on my mule. Anoint him at Gibeon with oil. Let the people shout, Long live King Solomon. Then bring him to sit on my throne, today. And so it began. The king's mule, a sacred symbol never ridden by another, bore Solomon down the streets of Jerusalem. Not in secret, not in shadows, but in full view of the nation. Priests blew the ram's horn. Crowds poured out. The sound of shofars split the sky. At Gibeon Spring, the oil was poured, not from any container, but from the sacred horn of anointing kept by Zadok. As it flowed over Solomon's head, the prophecy awakened. Heaven confirmed what earth was just beginning to see. Long live King Solomon, the people roared. The sound was thunderous. And it reached Adonijah. He was mid-toast, celebrating his stolen kingdom when the echoes of true authority crashed over him like a tidal wave. Messengers ran in. Panic struck the feast. The music stopped. The guests fled. Adonijah's face drained of color. He knew what came next. He raced to the altar, not to pray, but to grab the horns. A desperate act. In Israel, grabbing the altar's horns meant seeking mercy, a sanctuary for the guilty. He begged for his life. "Let King Solomon swear he will not kill me." Solomon, wise even in his youth, responded with calm justice. "If he proves himself worthy, not a hair on his head will fall. But if evil is found in him, he dies." Just like that, the throne shifted. No blood was spilled that day. No war erupted. But the power transferred completely, not by strength, but by divine strategy, prophetic timing, and heavenly favor. Solomon was no longer the boy with a quiet spirit. He was now king of Israel, enthroned by a father's promise, sealed by a prophet's oil, and backed by the roar of a nation. And yet, this was only the beginning. If you're fascinated by Solomon's wisdom and want to uncover more hidden truths, make sure to like this video and share it with friends who love deep Bible stories. The throne was his, but shadows still moved in silence. Enemies were watching. Old grudges had not died. And Solomon would soon learn that ruling in peace would require battles far more subtle, far more dangerous than the wars of his father. Now crowned and seated on the throne of David, Solomon looked every part the king, young, robed, and regal. But beneath the flowing garments and cheers of Israel, the air around him pulsed with unseen danger. Solomon was king, but not yet safe. David's final days had passed like a dimming candle, yet before his spirit left, he summoned Solomon and spoke not like a father, but like a dying general. "Be strong. Show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, and deal with the enemies I leave behind." That last part? It wasn't a suggestion. It was a whispered command loaded with divine weight. The enemies were subtle, rooted, and deceptive. They had walked the palace halls for years, wearing cloaks of loyalty. Now, Solomon had to decide, purge them or perish. The first name on that list? Adonijah. He had bowed once. He had begged for his life, clutching the altar like a drowning man. Solomon had spared him. But power-hungry men rarely sit still. Only days into Solomon's reign, Adonijah slithered again, this time through a political trap. He approached Bathsheba, the queen mother, and made a bold, calculated request. "Ask Solomon to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." It seemed harmless to the untrained ear, but Bathsheba, trusting her maternal instincts, relayed it to her son. Solomon froze. This wasn't about love. Abishag was the beautiful young woman who served David in his final days, a living symbol of royal intimacy. To take her as a wife was a backdoor claim to the throne. Solomon's tone changed. His mercy hardened into divine resolve. "He has spoken his death sentence." That same hour, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Solomon's trusted executioner, strode through the palace. His sword did not sing, it silenced. Adonijah fell, not by surprise, but by justice. The last spark of rebellion from David's house was snuffed out. But Solomon's sword had just begun to swing. Next came Abiathar the priest, one of David's closest spiritual advisors who had stood with Adonijah. A descendant of Eli, he had served faithfully for decades, but loyalty isn't counted in years, it's measured in moments. Solomon spared his life but banished him to Anathoth, stripping him of the priesthood. Curious about what happens next in Solomon's reign? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping episode. That action fulfilled an ancient prophecy, judgment on Eli's house, foretold generations before. Solomon wasn't just cleaning house. He was fulfilling divine justice. Then came the most dangerous threat of all, Joab, the blood-stained commander of Israel's army. He had fought for David. He had won wars. But Joab's hands were red with the murder of innocent men, Abner, Amasa, and now his allegiance to Adonijah was the final betrayal. When Joab heard the purges had begun, he ran, not to fight, but to the altar. Like Adonijah before him, he clutched the horns, hoping the holy place would shield him. But this time, mercy would not be granted. "Strike him down there," Solomon ordered. "Let his blood be on his own head." Benaiah obeyed. The floor of the tabernacle was stained that day, not by sacrifice, but by the judgment of heaven. The era of unchecked power was over. Justice, once delayed, had now arrived on Solomon's blade. One final name remained, Shimei. The man who once cursed David in public, who threw stones at the king as he fled Jerusalem during Absalom's rebellion, had been pardoned long ago, but David never forgot. Solomon offered him a deal: build a house in Jerusalem. Do not leave the city. The day you cross the Kidron Valley, you die. For 3 years, Shimei complied. But then, 2 of his servants fled, and in a reckless act of pride, he left the city to chase them down, crossing the very line Solomon had drawn. He returned, unaware his death warrant had already been signed. You knew the terms. You sealed your fate. Benaiah moved once more. Another old enemy fell, and with him, the last echo of David's unfulfilled justice faded. The kingdom was now clean, but the air still trembled. Solomon stood on a throne purchased not by bloodshed alone, but by alignment with God's judgment. Yet, deep in his heart, he felt the weight, not just of kingship, but of responsibility. He had the throne, but what he needed now was wisdom. So he traveled to Gibeon, where the great high place of worship still stood. The tabernacle was there. And though the ark rested in Jerusalem, Gibeon was where the nation met God before the temple existed. There, Solomon did something bold. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings. Not 1, not 10, 1,000. That night, as the smoke still curled into heaven and the stars watched silently, God came to Solomon in a dream. A voice like rushing water filled his spirit. Ask what I shall give you. No limit. No condition. The God who created galaxies offered Solomon a blank check. But the young king's heart was pure. I am but a child, he said humbly. I do not know how to go out or come in. Give me, therefore, an understanding heart, to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. He did not ask for riches, or revenge, or long life. He asked for discernment, the rarest gem in all the earth. And heaven answered, because you asked for wisdom and not for yourself, I give you both, wisdom beyond any man before you, and riches and honor like no king shall ever know. Solomon awoke with fire in his soul. Not confusion, not fading memory, but a deep knowing that God had met him in that dream. And almost immediately, the opportunity to prove that wisdom arrived. 2 women, 1 baby, a house divided by grief. Both claimed to be the mother. There were no witnesses, no evidence, only tears and accusation. The court watched in silence as Solomon listened. He didn't frown, didn't pace. He simply called for a sword. Cut the child in 2. Give half to each woman. The room froze. 1 woman screamed, No. Give her the child, please, do not kill him. The other said coldly, Let it be neither mine nor hers. Divide him. Solomon's eyes sharpened. She is the true mother. Give her the living child. Gasps swept the room. The court was stunned. Wisdom had spoken. It wasn't just about judgment. It was divine insight, seeing hearts through layers of lies. And from that day forward, all Israel knew, this king did not rule with a sword alone. He ruled with the mind of heaven. For the first time in generations, the sound of war drums faded. No enemies stormed the gates. No blood stained the hills. Israel, a land once shaped by conflict, conquest, and cries to heaven, now hummed with laughter, music, and unshakable peace. Solomon sat on the throne, and the sun rose gently upon a golden kingdom. It was as if God himself breathed prosperity into the soil. All the nations around Israel, once trembling at David's sword, now came bearing gifts, not threats. There were no wars to fight, only alliances to form. Solomon, the man whose wisdom echoed from throne to temple, began to do what no king before him could. He built, he ruled, and he expanded without lifting a sword. From the Euphrates to the borders of Egypt, Solomon's influence stretched like the horizon itself. Nations paid tribute, not out of fear, but out of respect. Their kings sent ambassadors. Their merchants crossed deserts with offerings. Their craftsmen begged to serve in his court. No one dared challenge the throne of Israel. Even Tyre, home of the master builders and seafarers, allied with Solomon. King Hiram, who had loved David, rejoiced in Solomon's reign. He sent cedar logs, skilled workers, and architects of international fame. "Blessed be the Lord this day," Hiram said, "who has given David a wise son to rule over this great people." And with that, Israel was no longer just a warrior nation. It was a kingdom of vision, beauty, and global wonder. Silver? In Solomon's day, it was as common as stones. Gold flowed in like rivers from far-off lands. Precious spices, rare gems, horses from Egypt, chariots from distant cities, all poured into the kingdom like tributaries feeding a mighty sea. The economy didn't just grow, it exploded. Ports were established, trade routes carved into the wilderness. Solomon launched fleets from Eziongeber on the Red Sea, partnering with Hiram's sailors. Ships set sail to Ophir, returning with unimaginable wealth, gold, ivory, apes, and peacocks. The people? They prospered beyond imagination. Each man sat under his own vine and fig tree. There was no oppression, no famine, no anxiety in the streets. It was a glimpse of Eden, peace, provision, and the presence of divine order. And then came the throne. Solomon did not just rule from a chair of carved wood. He built a masterpiece, a throne of ivory overlaid with pure gold, flanked by 12 golden lions, 6 steps leading up like a stairway to heaven. No other kingdom in the world had seen anything like it. Visitors from distant realms entered his court and stood speechless. Every goblet was gold. Every detail, from palace curtain to temple column, reflected thought, wisdom, and wealth beyond comprehension. His personal treasury? Beyond counting. He collected 420 talents of gold annually, that's over 16 tons of solid gold, not including merchants, traders, and foreign kings pouring more into the royal vaults. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen stationed in key cities throughout the kingdom. Solomon wasn't just a king. He was the embodiment of divine blessing. But it wasn't the gold that dazzled most. It was the mind behind it all. Solomon's wisdom was no parlor trick, it was God-breathed strategy in motion. He spoke of trees, from the mighty cedar of Lebanon to the tiny hyssop that grows out of walls. He catalogued birds, beasts, creeping things, and fish. He wrote 3,000 proverbs and composed 1,005 songs. Scholars, nobles, and rulers made pilgrimages just to sit at his feet. From Arabia to Sheba, the whispers spread. There is a king in Israel whose mind is deeper than the sea. The 12 tribes, often fractured and stubborn, now flowed as one people. Solomon's administrative brilliance divided the land into regions, each with appointed governors who supplied the palace for 1 month of the year. No tribe was overburdened. No city neglected. He established order without oppression. Justice without cruelty. Progress without rebellion. And the world noticed. Envoys from kingdoms beyond the Jordan, across the Nile, over mountains and deserts, arrived with curiosity and tribute. The roads into Jerusalem became golden arteries, pulsing with trade, knowledge, and reverence. They all came to see the man whose God had made him wise. But deep within the palace, as Solomon sat surrounded by splendor, another whisper began to rise, soft, distant, and easy to ignore. Is this peace eternal? Can gold hold the heart forever? For though his wisdom had built a heaven on earth, a question lingered behind the walls of cedar and gold. Would the one who received everything from God remain faithful, or drift silently from the God who gave it all? The days following the rise of Solomon's wisdom were marked not only by justice and brilliant governance, but by a burning vision passed down from his father, a vision that David had carried in his soul like sacred fire, the building of a temple for the God of Israel. David had longed to construct a house for the Lord, a permanent dwelling where the Ark of the Covenant would rest, but the Lord had denied him the privilege, for his hands were stained with the blood of many battles. That divine privilege was given instead to Solomon, the son of peace, born not in the shadow of war, but in the stillness of God's favor. Solomon understood this charge with a trembling sense of honor and responsibility. The people of Israel watched as their young king took up a task greater than any earthly monument, for this was no mere architectural feat, it was to be the very throne room of the living God on earth. The temple would become the heart of worship, the place where the Most High would cause his name to dwell. He began by calling to mind every detail David had prepared. The blueprints were already drawn by the hand of a prophet. The materials had been stored, gathered in quiet anticipation during David's later years. Now it was time to raise the structure. Solomon wasted no time. He sent word to Hiram, king of Tyre, a loyal ally of David and a man whose cedar forests were famous across the ancient world. Solomon's letter was humble but firm, requesting the finest timber and the most skilled artisans, men who could carve, shape, and craft a house not for man, but for God. Hiram responded with reverence. He agreed to provide the cedar and cypress logs, and he sent Huram-Abi, a master craftsman from Tyre, half Israelite, half Tyrian, whose genius in bronze and precious metals was unmatched. The scale of the operation was immense. Solomon conscripted tens of thousands of workers, 30,000 men in shifts to labor in Lebanon, 70,000 burden bearers, and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills. Overseeing them were over 3,000 officers, all appointed with the task of ensuring that not a single misstep occurred during the sacred endeavor. For 7 years, the mountain of Moriah echoed with the sound of labor. Yet, as magnificent as the construction was, there was something deeply holy about it, for no hammer or chisel was heard within the actual temple walls. The stones were cut and prepared at the quarry, then silently placed in their appointed positions, each one fitting perfectly, as if the hand of the divine was guiding their arrangement. The temple itself rose like a vision from heaven, golden, gleaming, and precise in every dimension. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube overlaid entirely with pure gold. 2 colossal cherubim of olive wood stood within it, their wings stretching from wall to wall, their gaze fixed toward the mercy seat atop the Ark of the Covenant. Every surface was adorned with carvings of palm trees, lilies, and open flowers, symbols of life and paradise, drawn from Eden itself. Outside the temple, Solomon constructed the Great Bronze Sea, a massive basin resting on 12 oxen, each facing outward, 3 to a side. This sea held thousands of gallons of water and symbolized both purity and the vastness of God's covenant. There were golden lampstands, 10 tables, countless utensils for worship, all cast in bronze and gold by the steady hands of Huram-Abi's craftsmen. When the final stone was set and the last gold leaf was placed, Solomon summoned all of Israel's elders, priests, and leaders for the dedication. The Ark of the Covenant was brought in solemn procession by the Levites, covered in reverence, as trumpeters and singers raised a sound of praise that shook the heavens. As the priests placed the ark within the Holy of Holies, a cloud filled the temple, thick, luminous, and holy. It was the glory of the Lord, descending in a visible sign that God had accepted Solomon's offering. Solomon stood before the altar, his hands stretched toward heaven, and prayed with a voice that rang across the courtyards. He begged God to hear the cries of his people, to dwell among them, to show mercy to the sinner who repented, and to respond to the foreigner who came seeking the God of Israel. It was a prayer for every generation, one etched into eternity. That night, after the smoke had risen and the sacrifices had been consumed, God appeared to Solomon a second time. In the quiet of a dream, the Lord spoke. He had chosen this temple for his name to dwell, but there was a warning. If Solomon turned from the covenant and worshipped other gods, the temple itself would be cast down, and Israel would become a byword among the nations. The glory could be withdrawn as swiftly as it came. But Solomon, in the prime of his reign, was not yet divided in heart. His zeal burned, and his hand was steady. He did not stop at the temple. Driven by a mind unmatched in his time, Solomon embarked on a sweeping series of grand projects that reshaped Israel's identity. He constructed a magnificent palace for himself that took 13 years to build, a royal complex of halls, courts, and armories whose pillars were carved with intricate motifs of lions, pomegranates, and cedar beams. His throne room was famed throughout the region, an ivory seat overlaid with gold, flanked by 12 lions on steps that gleamed in the light. He fortified cities across Israel, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, building walls, gates, and massive storehouses. The chariot cities and cavalry stables he established gave Israel military strength like never before. Solomon's fleets, launched from Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea, sailed with the Phoenicians to Ophir, bringing back gold, precious stones, and exotic animals that dazzled the courts. Trade routes stretched from Sheba to Egypt, from Tarshish to the coasts of distant lands. Tribute poured into Jerusalem, silver became as common as stones, cedar as plentiful as sycamores. The fame of Solomon's works spread beyond borders, and kings of foreign lands came seeking both alliance and awe. In every venture, Solomon's mastery of administration was evident. He divided Israel into 12 districts, each responsible for supplying the royal court 1 month of the year. It was efficient and equitable, ensuring no single tribe bore the burden alone. He elevated Israel from a tribal kingdom to a structured empire, its influence spanning from the Euphrates to Egypt. And yet, in the quiet moments, Solomon would still climb the steps of the temple he built, place his hands on the golden rail of the altar, and remember the covenant, the voice in the dream, the cloud of glory, the fire from heaven. He had built the house of God, not just with gold and stone, but with obedience, wisdom, and the legacy of his father's devotion. But even amid the splendor of palaces and ports, of gold shields and cedar-paneled walls, a whisper stirred behind the veil, for greatness, unchecked, always holds the seed of decline. That shadow, for now, lay hidden beneath the glitter of Solomon's golden age. Are you enjoying this journey through history and mystery? Drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions. I love hearing from you. Far to the south of Israel, beyond the parched deserts and the golden sands of Arabia, beyond the mountains and the trade routes choked with incense, spices, and gold, lay the mighty kingdom of Sheba, a realm of mystery, wealth, and fierce wisdom. Its ruler, a queen unlike any other, was famed for her intellect, beauty, and iron-fisted command over a land teeming with riches. Her name, like a whisper on the wind, was feared and revered across empires. But in the still hours of the night, even she had questions that her own counselors could not answer. Rumors had traveled far, carried by traders, sailors, and wandering scribes, that in Jerusalem there sat a king whose wisdom surpassed human comprehension. They spoke of Solomon, son of David, whose words pierced the soul and whose gaze seemed to see into the thoughts of men. They said he understood the language of birds, that he could solve riddles that bent the mind, and that he ruled a kingdom so wealthy even gold had lost its rarity. The Queen of Sheba, known for testing the mettle of kings, could not ignore the reports. Her heart stirred with both curiosity and pride. Was there truly a man on earth who could match her in wisdom? Was this Solomon's fame deserved, or was it merely smoke and echo? She resolved to find out for herself. And so, she prepared her caravan, not of soldiers, but of splendor. When her procession set out from Sheba, the earth trembled beneath its weight. Camels groaned under loads of spices that made the desert air sweet, sacks of gold dust, and rare jewels that glittered like fragments of starlight. Her advisors, scribes, and attendants followed in ranks, a glittering river of wealth moving slowly across the ancient trade routes toward Jerusalem. The journey was long, but her resolve never wavered. As she entered the gates of Jerusalem, the people stood in stunned silence. They had seen foreign envoys before, but nothing like this. Her guards were clad in patterned armor made from the hide of exotic beasts. Her robes shimmered like moonlight on water, woven with gold threads. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, missed nothing. But more than her beauty or majesty, it was her bearing that commanded awe, like a lioness who bowed to no man. Solomon was prepared. Word of her approach had preceded her, and he had readied his court with grace and decorum. When she entered the great hall of his palace, the moment was one the earth itself seemed to hold its breath for. She looked upon the man seated on a throne of ivory and gold, carved with lions and steps rising to the dais, and for a brief moment, her expression faltered, not with fear, but with respect. Then she began her test. The Queen of Sheba posed riddles so layered, so tangled in metaphor and illusion, that no philosopher of her court had ever answered them. But Solomon smiled gently at each one, unraveling her puzzles as if reading the lines of a familiar scroll. She asked about the mysteries of life and death, the nature of truth, the behavior of the stars, and the hidden meanings of dreams. Solomon answered with depth that made her advisors shift uncomfortably in their sandals. Then she watched him rule. She saw two men come before him, each claiming a piece of land. Solomon asked questions neither expected and issued a ruling that caused both to weep, one in sorrow, the other in repentance. She saw a mother arrive, frantic, over a missing child. Solomon simply looked into her eyes, then sent for a guard, and within the hour, the truth had surfaced. Justice came quickly in Solomon's court, but never without mercy. The Queen of Sheba was shaken, not because she had been defeated, but because she had never before seen wisdom so drenched in compassion. He took her through the temple, not as a man showing off treasure, but as a priest leading someone into the presence of the divine. She touched the walls of gold, smelled the burning incense, and stood beneath the towering cherubim in silence. She saw the priests in holy garments, the Levitical choirs singing songs that pierced the veil between heaven and earth. And when the wind stirred in the inner court, she felt, for the first time in her life, the awe of a God she had only heard of in foreign tales. After days of discourse and observation, the queen sat with Solomon alone in his private court. The fire crackled softly behind them. Candles flickered in the corners of the room, their golden light glinting off polished stone. She leaned forward, her voice steady but softer now. "It was a true report I heard in my land of your acts and your wisdom," she said. "But I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame I heard." Her voice was not full of defeat, but of admiration, the kind one offers to someone who has truly earned honor. Then she said something that surprised even Solomon. "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he made you king, to do justice and righteousness." Solomon smiled, not as a ruler triumphant over a rival queen, but as a man grateful that glory had not hardened his heart. In a final gesture of honor, the Queen of Sheba offered him gifts, 120 talents of gold, a mountain of spices no one had ever smelled before, and stones of inestimable worth. No spices like those ever came again to Jerusalem. Solomon, in return, gave her everything she asked for, and more. The record says he gave her whatever she desired, besides what she brought, as a king who lacked nothing and who gave as God had given him, generously and without restraint. When the queen finally departed with her retinue, Jerusalem felt emptier. The echo of her visit lingered like perfume in the halls. It was a meeting the world would remember, not merely between royalty, but between wisdom and wonder, between question and answer, between a kingdom of the south and a throne God had established in Zion. As her caravan disappeared into the horizon, even the camels seemed to walk lighter, as if they, too, had been touched by something eternal. And Solomon? He returned to his chambers, his heart at peace. He had nothing to prove, and yet everything to steward. The nations were beginning to gather at his feet. But the test of fame, unlike that of riddles, would come in a different form. The golden light that once bathed Solomon's court began to dim, not suddenly, but subtly, like twilight overtaking the last rays of day. Prosperity still clothed Jerusalem like a royal robe. The temple still stood in glory, priests still offered sacrifices, and the scent of incense still curled into the heavens. But something had shifted. The sounds of harp and psalm no longer stirred Solomon's heart the way they once did. The fire of his early zeal, that once burned with such fierce devotion for the Lord, had grown faint, buried beneath layers of gold, power, and unchecked desire. Solomon had tasted the admiration of kings and queens. He had wielded influence that reached beyond empires. But for all his wisdom, he underestimated the quiet seduction of compromise, especially when it came in the form of beauty. It began with marriage alliances, treaties sealed not with ink, but with vows. Pharaoh's daughter was the first. Solomon had brought her into the city of David before the completion of his palace, and though the union seemed political, it was the gateway. Soon, others followed. Moabite princesses with sun-darkened skin and songs of distant gods, Ammonite women who spoke softly of Molech and of fire, Sidonian noblewomen who brought tiny idols wrapped in silk and whispered the name Ashtoreth like a lover's secret. He loved them all. Not in passing fancy, but with a binding affection that began to warp his soul. These were not women drawn to Israel's God. They were daughters of nations Israel had been warned never to mingle with. God's command had been clear: "You shall not intermarry with them, for surely they will turn your hearts after their gods." But Solomon, blinded by the sweetness of their touch and the allure of their devotion, ignored the warning. And just as the Lord had said, their gods followed them. What began in private chambers soon crept into public life. Solomon, wishing to please the women he loved, permitted them to burn incense to their deities. He allowed altars to be built on the high places outside Jerusalem, subtle, temporary, just for them. But idols, once invited, do not remain guests. They take residence. Soon, Solomon himself began to watch the rituals. Then, on rare days, he participated, not in full rejection of Yahweh, but in a blended devotion. A little here, a little there. It was not that he stopped believing in the Lord, it was that he added others beside him. He built a high place for Chemosh, the vile god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites, whose worship demanded the lives of infants in fire. On the hills east of Jerusalem, smoke rose from altars not to the God of Abraham, but to demons in disguise. The man who once built the temple to the one true God now crafted shrines for abominations. And the people saw. The heart of the king sets the course of the nation. As Solomon's soul fractured, so did Israel's devotion. Some followed him blindly, others cautiously. But all sensed the change. The city that once echoed with songs to the Lord began to ring with foreign chants. The king's wisdom remained, but the anointing that made him great began to dry up. He could still rule, still judge, still command ships and armies, but the presence of God, that holy fragrance that once saturated his every step, grew faint. Solomon did not notice the departure at first. The decline of the Spirit rarely announces itself with thunder. It comes quietly, like the slow leak of oil from a sacred lamp. But heaven noticed. God, whose mercy had stretched far beyond what men could imagine, had watched Solomon's descent with long-suffering patience. Yet now the line had been crossed. The king who had once stood before the Ark of the Covenant, arms raised in fiery prayer, had now bowed to stone statues molded by human hands. Then, in a moment as chilling as it was final, the Lord appeared to Solomon once more. It was not a dream like at Gibeon, full of promise and glory. It was a divine confrontation. The voice that had once spoken with warmth now thundered with sorrow and righteous anger. "Because you have done this," the Lord said, "and have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days. But I will tear it out of the hand of your son." The word struck like a blade through the heart of Solomon's legacy. He would remain king, yes, but his dynasty would never rule as one. His house, which he had adorned with splendor and pride, would be divided, and the unity his father fought to establish would be shattered. God's judgment did not end with a decree. It manifested in adversaries, men God raised up to trouble Solomon from within and without. Hadad the Edomite, long thought forgotten, returned from exile with hatred smoldering in his heart. Rezin of Zobah, a guerrilla king, carved a rebel kingdom and harassed Israel's borders with relentless raids. Then came Jeroboam, a servant in Solomon's own administration, whom the prophet Ahijah secretly anointed with 10 pieces of a torn cloak, a sign that 10 tribes would one day be his. Solomon's peace, once as firm as the pillars of his temple, began to crack. The empire that had once bowed to his wisdom now whispered rebellion. The aging king, once full of divine insight, now walked his palace in troubled silence, knowing that what he had built was already beginning to unravel. He wrote again, perhaps Ecclesiastes, a journal of a soul searching for meaning beneath the sun. There, his voice was no longer triumphant but haunted. "Vanity of vanities," he sighed. "All is vanity." He who had once tasted the favor of heaven now tasted the emptiness of everything that is not of God. And so ended the glory of Solomon's rise, not with the crash of armies or the ruin of a kingdom, but with the slow erosion of a man who once knew God and turned his back. He died with gold in his treasury, idols in his land, and a divided promise hanging over his house. But the story was not over, not for Israel, not for David's line, and not for the purposes of God. For from the ashes of Solomon's fall, a new story would rise. One of division, judgment, and eventually, redemption. The winds had changed. Though Solomon still reigned from his magnificent palace, the once quiet corners of the kingdom stirred with unrest. Beneath the surface of Israel's golden age, rebellion had begun to smolder like embers under ash, quiet at first, almost unnoticed. But they were embers lit by the hand of God himself. The king no longer slept peacefully. His chamber, once bathed in heavenly tranquility, now echoed with footsteps of unrest. His dreams brought no more divine whispers, only shadows of a throne threatened. Solomon, the man once feared for his wisdom, was now haunted by prophecy. Jeroboam was among the first signs that something irreversible was happening. He was not a prince. He bore no royal blood nor ancient tribal name. Jeroboam was the son of Nebat, a servant from the tribe of Ephraim, born in the obscure town of Zerida. But he carried something Solomon had long lost, the favor of God. Jeroboam was intelligent, industrious, and sharp-eyed. Solomon, ever the keen judge of talent, noticed him during a royal inspection of labor forces in Jerusalem. At the time, Solomon had been fortifying the Millo and repairing the breaches of the city of David. Heavy construction demanded thousands of laborers from among the tribes, a conscripted workforce organized into rotating shifts. Among these laborers, Jeroboam stood out like a lion among sheep. His leadership was effortless. He didn't bark orders, he inspired obedience. The people followed him instinctively, drawn to his charisma and clarity. Soon, Solomon appointed him as the overseer of the entire labor force from the house of Joseph, a significant and strategic position. But beneath this promotion lay the soil of something ancient, tribal tension. The tribe of Ephraim had long harbored subtle resentment against Judah's royal dominance. Though Israel had become a united kingdom, old rivalries had not died, only grown quiet under prosperity. Now, with Jeroboam rising from Ephraim and drawing admiration from the people, old sentiments were reigniting. But it wasn't merely ambition that pulled Jeroboam toward destiny, it was divine intervention. One day, as Jeroboam left Jerusalem, possibly on official business or personal reflection, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite approached him. The moment was quiet, unscheduled, unseen by courts or scribes. The two men stood alone in the open country, and Ahijah, wearing a new cloak, suddenly tore it into 12 ragged pieces. Jeroboam watched in silence as the prophet extended 10 pieces toward him and spoke words that echoed with divine judgment. "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and give 10 tribes to you." The prophet's voice cut through the air like a blade. He explained why this was happening. Solomon's heart had turned after other gods, and he had not walked in the ways of David his father. The judgment would not fall in Solomon's lifetime, for the sake of David, but it would fall upon his son. Jeroboam would one day be king, not of all Israel, but of a broken kingdom, torn by the hand of God. Jeroboam didn't ask for this. Yet in that moment, the weight of a nation's future rested on his shoulders. But rumors travel fast in palaces, and Solomon's ears were ever alert. When word reached him of the prophecy, that his servant Jeroboam had been chosen to take the lion's share of the kingdom, his heart erupted with a fury that surprised even himself. Solomon, the man who once resolved disputes with the calm of divine insight, now ordered Jeroboam's death. It was a chilling shift, a king threatened not by a foreign army, but by a man he had once promoted. Jeroboam fled south to Egypt, where Pharaoh Shishak received him favorably, giving him refuge. The same Egypt from which God had once delivered his people now became a sanctuary for the next chapter in Israel's unraveling story. Yet Jeroboam was not the only thorn in Solomon's side. Long before him, God had already begun lifting his protective hand. From the distant sands of Edom returned Hadad, a prince of royal blood whose family had been slaughtered by Joab during David's campaigns. As a child, Hadad had fled with servants to Egypt, where he was raised in luxury under Pharaoh's eye. He married into the royal family and bided his time, quietly nursing a hatred that burned for years. When he heard that both David and Joab had died, Hadad returned to Edom. Not as a refugee, but as a spark of resistance. Though his armies were small, his presence stirred the region into defiance. Solomon's messengers could not contain the whisper of rebellion. Hadad harassed Israel's southern borders, disrupting trade routes and pressuring Solomon's military. Then came Rezin, the former servant of King Hadadezer of Zobah. After escaping David's defeat of Zobah, Rezin gathered a band of outlaws and mercenaries, eventually establishing a throne of his own in Damascus. From there, he reigned over Syria, a new power just beyond Israel's northern border. He hated Israel, not out of personal vengeance like Hadad, but for national pride. Under his command, Damascus became a sanctuary for those disillusioned with Solomon's regime. Together, these adversaries formed a triangle of unrest: Edom in the south, Damascus in the north, and Jeroboam poised in exile, waiting in the wings. They were not merely enemies of Solomon's peace, they were instruments of divine judgment. What once looked like an invincible kingdom now bore fractures beneath the surface. Tribes whispered among themselves. Taxes, once paid with joy, now felt like chains. The memory of Solomon's early glory had become a haunting contrast to the slow descent into unrest and idolatry. Solomon, despite his wisdom, could not unwrite prophecy. He strengthened his military, fortified cities, and expanded his administrative reach, but he could not silence the voice of God spoken through Ahijah. Each passing year grew heavier. The king's once radiant court, filled with laughter, scholars, and music, now felt more like a tomb encased in gold. The joy of building had turned into the burden of maintaining a crumbling order. And deep within, Solomon must have known, this was the consequence of turning away. He had once sung, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." Now those words mocked him. For the Lord had once built his house, but Solomon had let idols live in its rooms. And so the kingdom waited, trembling, for the judgment that would come when Solomon's crown passed to his son. The twilight of Solomon's reign did not come with thunder or fanfare, but with an aching silence that spread across the palace halls like a funeral shroud. The once vibrant city of Jerusalem, filled with merchants, sages, nobles, and pilgrims, now seemed to hold its breath, as though the very walls of Zion sensed the closing of an era. Solomon was aging. Not just in years, but in spirit. His footsteps slowed, not from physical ailment alone, but from the unbearable weight of regret. His once sharp mind, that had outwitted sages and puzzled kings, now wandered into memories. The face of his father David, the innocent years of youth in Gibeon, the first cries of the temple's dedication, and the silent betrayal of his own soul to foreign gods. He had once walked with God in glorious nearness. Now, in his final days, that nearness felt distant, like a warmth he once knew but could no longer touch. His palace, that grand cedar-framed wonder imported from Lebanon, gleaming with gold and ivory, became a golden prison. And in its silence, Solomon began to write again. But not as a wise king giving counsel to the young. He wrote now as a broken man passing through the corridors of life's vanities. Vanity of vanities, he penned in his chamber. All is vanity. He looked at the towering monuments he had built, the reservoirs he had carved from the land, the cities fortified with stone, and the vast fleets harbored in the southern port of Ezion-Geber. He had wealth beyond what his heart could desire. Silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem, yet none of it comforted his soul now. It was as if the pleasures he had so recklessly embraced in his middle years had turned to dust in his mouth. And then came the illness. Subtle at first, a cough, fatigue, disinterest in food. The physicians were summoned, but no medicine could mend a soul ravaged by divine displeasure. The foreign wives he once doted on now kept their distance. Even his advisers, once eager to speak in his presence, now whispered in uncertain tones outside his chamber doors. Solomon's eyes often searched for Rehoboam, his son and heir, but rarely found him. Rehoboam had grown up in privilege, but not in discipline. Born to Naamah, the Ammonite princess, he was raised more by royal status than by godly wisdom. Solomon had tried to instruct him in earlier years, but the boy had been surrounded by flattery and the pomp of court life. The hard lessons David had once taught Solomon in wilderness and war were never passed down through experience, only through scrolls and fading words. Still, the crown had to pass. The covenant of kingship, promised through David, would not be severed. Even in the judgment that awaited, God would still honor the word he gave David, a lamp in Jerusalem, a remnant of the house of Judah. As Solomon lay upon his gilded bed, he summoned the high priest, the prophet, and the elders. The room was solemn. Candles flickered against the walls as the dying king, once clothed in purple and gold, now lay wrapped in plain linens, face gaunt, eyes hollow. With a trembling voice, he gave final instructions. Not about wars or treaties, not about commerce or architecture, but about the kingdom that would soon stand on the edge of a knife. Tell him, fear the Lord, he whispered. Tell him, it is not wisdom alone that keeps a man upright, but obedience. And with that final breath, Solomon, the son of David, the builder of the temple, the wisest king who ever lived, slipped into the silence of death. The news spread like wildfire. From the coastlands of Philistia to the snow-dusted ridges of Mount Hermon, from the banks of the Jordan to the distant deserts east of the Dead Sea, the land of Israel stirred as messengers carried the word, Solomon is dead. In the capital, the people gathered in mourning. For all his flaws and failures, Solomon had reigned over 4 decades of unmatched prosperity and peace. No foreign sword had pierced their borders. No famine had seized their fields. Under his rule, Israel had tasted what few nations ever knew, golden glory under a single crown. But peace is a delicate thread. And once stretched by sin and severed by disobedience, it unravels swiftly. The elders of Israel, weary from years of heavy taxation and forced labor, approached Rehoboam not in rebellion, but in request. They met at Shechem, a city with historical weight, where Abraham once built an altar, where Joseph's bones were laid to rest, and now, where the fate of a kingdom would hang in balance. The tribes said to Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the harsh labor and heavy burden he put on us, and we will serve you." It was not an unreasonable plea. It was an opportunity, a divine chance, to mend what had been strained under Solomon's heavy hand. Rehoboam asked for 3 days to consider. And wisely he first turned to the elders who had served Solomon. They advised him gently, "If you serve the people today, answer them kindly, they will be your servants forever." It was wise counsel, echoing the servant-hearted leadership David once modeled. But Rehoboam's heart leaned not toward wisdom, but pride. He turned instead to his young peers, men raised with him in the palace, spoiled on privilege, unscarred by adversity. Their advice was poison. "Tell them," they said, "my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions." And so he did. Before the assembly at Shechem, Rehoboam stood in royal robes, but spoke with a tyrant's tongue. The moment the words left his mouth, a tremor passed through the crowd, not of fear, but of fury. The 10 northern tribes erupted. Centuries of buried tension exploded in an instant. What share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel! And just like that, the kingdom cracked. Rehoboam fled to Jerusalem, barely escaping the wrath of the tribes. Only Judah, and later, Benjamin, remained loyal. The rest crowned Jeroboam king, fulfilling Ahijah's prophecy spoken in secrecy years ago. Israel was now 2 kingdoms. The house of David was no longer the united heart of 12 tribes, but the battered remnant of a once glorious empire. Solomon was buried in the city of David, laid beside his father. But the kingdom he left behind was not like the one he inherited. It was broken. And its breaking would echo through centuries of conflict, corruption, invasion, and exile. Yet even here, in the ashes of division, the promise of God remained. A king would still come. Not through Solomon's glory, but through David's line. Not in a palace of cedar and gold, but in a manger. And one day, that true son of David would reign with perfect justice and peace, reuniting not just Israel, but all who would call upon the name of the Lord. Solomon's legacy and the moral lessons of his life. As the dust of Solomon's golden era settled into the soil of Jerusalem, and his great monuments stood still under the rising sun, the weight of his legacy began to speak louder than the sound of silver clinking in royal treasuries or the praises sung by foreign dignitaries. For many, Solomon was a marvel. A man whose wisdom surpassed all who came before or after him. A king who made the name of Israel great among nations. A builder of the house of God. A composer of proverbs and songs that echoed through generations. His intellect was unmatched, his leadership enviable, and his peace unprecedented. But for heaven, and for history, Solomon's legacy was more than his success. It was a solemn warning painted in gold and shadow. He began with a heart tender toward God, and a desire to judge the people with righteousness. He built the temple not for glory, but for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He understood the fear of the Lord was the beginning of wisdom, and from that holy fear came divine dreams, just rulings, and unshakable peace. But over time, his heart began to drift. Not with haste, but with compromise. First, he tolerated what God forbade. He married foreign women, not for diplomacy alone, but for pleasure. Slowly they led his heart toward idols. And the man who once stood in awe before the Ark of the Covenant now built shrines to Chemosh, Molech, and Ashtoreth. Then he elevated himself above obedience. He built a massive palace larger than the temple itself. He imported chariots from Egypt. He accumulated unimaginable wealth. He used forced labor on his own people, a violation of God's command for kings not to oppress their brethren. And finally, he neglected his own household. Rehoboam, his heir, did not inherit his wisdom, only his crown. And without spiritual guidance, the kingdom he built so brilliantly was torn apart within days of his death. Solomon's life stands as one of the Bible's most complex legacies. A man chosen, gifted, anointed, and yet undone by compromise. Moral lessons from the story of Solomon. 1. Wisdom is useless without obedience. God gave Solomon more wisdom than any man, but wisdom without obedience is like light in the hands of a blind man. It cannot lead. True wisdom isn't just what you know, it's what you do with what God says. 2. Success is not security. Solomon's prosperity, military power, and fame did not shield him from spiritual decline. Success in the eyes of men means nothing if one is failing in the eyes of God. 3. Compromise is a slow killer. Solomon did not fall in a day. He fell in degrees. A marriage here. A shrine there. A tax raised. A prayer forgotten. Sin entered gently, but its effect was deadly. The small foxes spoiled the vine. 4. Spiritual leadership begins at home. Solomon built a temple for God but failed to build a foundation of truth in his own son. A wise man must first disciple his family before he tries to lead a nation. 5. Gifts cannot replace character. God gave Solomon divine gifts, wisdom, favor, understanding. But those gifts could not protect him from himself. Gifts can open doors, but only godly character can keep a man standing inside those doors. 6. God keeps his covenant, even in judgment. Though Solomon fell, God did not remove the kingdom entirely from David's line. Even in wrath, he remembered mercy. The Messiah would still come from David's seed, because God's promises outlast man's failures. So now, as the curtains close on the life of Solomon, what remains is not merely a memory of a king, but a mirror to every soul who reads his story. The questions echo across time. Will you choose obedience over indulgence? Will you finish strong or fall in the last chapter? Will you leave behind monuments or eternal testimonies of faith? Solomon built a temple of stone. But God is seeking those who will build a temple of obedience in their hearts, one not made by hands, but by surrender, devotion, and truth. Closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wisdom found in your word and the lessons drawn from the life of Solomon. You are the God who gives knowledge, favor, and understanding, and yet, you desire obedience above all. Lord, help us to seek wisdom not for glory, but to walk in your ways. Guard our hearts from pride, compromise, and distraction. Teach us to finish well, to lead with humility, and to build our lives on the foundation of faithfulness to you. Let our legacy be one of righteousness, not riches, of obedience, not opportunity. May we fear you, serve you, and honor you all the days of our lives. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. If this story of King Solomon has captivated your heart and mind, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with everyone who loves exploring God's Word deeply. Stay tuned for more fascinating episodes coming soon.